Om Vacham Nyachatmani Tam Nyacham Buddhaudiyam Yacha Chabudi Sakshini Tam Chapi Purnatmani Nirvikalpe Vyapya Shantim Paramam Bhajasva Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. The practitioner of blissful dissolution dissolves all worlds and all words into the mind, and the mind into the intellect into the ego into the witness into the Atman, and the Atman into Brahman. In this way does he experience and enjoy eternal peace and supreme bliss. Om peace, peace, peace. That which the mind and speech fall away from, unable to comprehend or express. The one that realizes the bliss of that Brahman destroys doubt and fear forever. And so it is. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. And now the third class in our series called The Role of the Memory in the Process of Rebirth can commence, which I must announce off the top that it'll be a 5-class series rather than a 3-class series. We do have 2 more Sundays after this with which to explore, and the series has brought up a lot of good questions, brought a lot of clarity to a few people who have written in, and we'll reach a fine conclusion, a siddhanta, if we can keep at it, the final chart alone called Smriti, or the problem of lack of memory. And this doesn't just mean as we age, because our brains begin to deteriorate, but we're talking about the mind's memory, not so much the brain's memory. So the mind is having to remember experiences it had previously in that self-same collective mind, out of which many body-mind mechanisms have been manifesting themselves. And we answered that question first off in the first class. Basically, that was, what is it that incarnates? And I knew that question would come up, particularly with people with non-dual leanings, like Advaita Vedantas and Buddhists, so forth. So we clarified and said it's the body-mind mechanism in Vedanta that's doing this transmigrating process. 5 Shis, the Koshas, the Upadhis. There are different names for that, which you can clarify by studying Vedanta philosophy. So that's the first point to make about these 5 W's. We're going to put who aside for now and just look at what, where, when, and why. And the what and where is answered in the first 2 classes, in the last 2 Sundays. Again, the what being, it's the body-mind mechanism. That's what is being manifested. That's what's transmigrating. So you have to state that to make it clear. Side by side with the second fact about that is that the Atman doesn't get reborn, doesn't get born, doesn't die. So that's this witness I just chanted about, that you dissolve mind into intellect and into ego. When the ego goes, that's this body-mind mechanism, isn't it? It's a mind-ego intellect complex, along with the thoughts First it was threefold. Later they turned it into a fourfold, antakarana, inner cause of all things. And he knew that's what was going from birth to death and death to birth. And getting reborn. And it was a complex. So today, hopefully, and maybe early next week, we'll have a look at what's in that complex, a samskara, and how that compels the soul to keep mounting this vehicle that goes from heaven to earth to hell and moves through the three worlds. So point number one, I'm trying to make this review as quick as I can for you and as simple, is that what is it that incarnates? The body-mind mechanism. And you have to hold that side by side with a second bit of knowledge here in Vedanta, that the Atman is not reincarnating. It's the witness to that process that's going on. So that should fully answer the question of what is it that's transmigrating. Not the Atman, it's witnessing. But this body-mind mechanism with its various memories, conditionings, complexes. We'll look at a complex later. All right, enough said. I'm going to make this simple and easy. Number two, last week we looked at it, where is it going? Like, hold on, boy, where are you going there? Can you stop the body-mind mechanism from its plunge into relativity? Well, that who question of the 5 W's would have been good for that, you see, because the who levels the playing field of relativity with sadhana when you ask, who am I? So that's a great method. Ramana Maharshi used that method. It's called Atma Vichara, asking who. But that's not fully answering the question, who am I? You have to come to this final conclusion in that method. I am that, or that thou art. These great Mahavakyas have to be heard. And then there's a process of realizing those too. So it's not just a matter of answering a profound question and then hopefully enlightenment will dawn. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked that way. And on top of that, sometimes enlightenment has dawned and people have fallen back out of it. I want to show you an instance of that in Yoga Vashishtha's story about Sukra. That'll be the first chart we look at. But back to this, where is it that it's transmigrating? If you remember back to last week, memory, remember that? That's what we were talking about here, is Smriti, our retentive memory. If you can remember, maybe you can't remember your past lifetime, but I hope you can remember last week's class. And in that way, you can see that I put up those charts that had to do with the title of it was the mind as heaven. You see, so it's going from heaven. The mind is going from heaven to earth to hell. It's dreaming itself into different forms. Dream is one word we can use. In Sanskrit, if you want to get closer to the philosophy, then you bring in these important words called sankalpa, vikalpa, which are mental projection out of desire. So desire then comes into the quotient. And also samskara. When you desire something, you enjoy it, it leaves behind something that you're not aware of. Oops. That is, you're attached to more of it, usually. If it leaves behind pain, then you're afraid of it, and you withdraw from it, and that leaves an impression that you have to come back to later. Why am I in fear? You see, why do I doubt? Because I had an experience with that last time, and I feared it, or I doubted it, or I didn't clarify it. It left a residue in my thinking process, and now it's like a magnet drawing me back. So these are some of the yoga psychology ways of talking about it. Modern therapy isn't going to get to that. Jung and Freud never got to that. See, so this yoga psychology you're talking about that has mapped out for thousands of years and actually many ages how this process of this dreamlike process of birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, death, rebirth is happening. And they teach this in the country of India called Bharat back then to all the children and all the people. And so after a while it becomes the main conditioning you think about these topics by, not evolution and not heaven. So this is why, where are we transmigrating to in the West today? most religions, paradise, heaven, some bardos, some akashas, some lokas. You can call words for these things realms in English, worlds. Inner worlds would be sure to put inner there, because outer worlds, we're trying to go there, but we're not making it, so it's obviously not meant for us. Birds have nests, foxes have holes. Birds and foxes can't even get up there to have nests and holes. So we're still stuck back here on Earth having this problem of attachment to matter. And all of these worlds of matter have come out of our thinking process. That's called sankalpa, vikalpa. And we still have a desire for them that we haven't been able to satisfy. Why is that? Because they can't be satisfied here. Satiation never comes. And this is why. To use why in a different way, this is why the soul's going from birth to death and death to birth. So if you take up that second W of where is it transmigrating to, and you say it's migrating to heavens, lokas, akashas, and so forth, then you have to say at the same time, all these are in the mind. Okay? That's two facts based in where and at what is transmigrating and where is it going to with their partners. I hope they're making this clear and you're getting it down. So, as it is confusing, I'm certainly not looking down the nose at anyone who's trying to understand this abstruse philosophy of Vedanta after having been conditioned by Western thinking for many, many, many lifetimes, as my teacher knew. He came in front of us as Americans and he'd say, oh, I see, I'm talking to American people here. I better change this up. Because if I were talking to Hindus, I'd be preaching to the choir if I talked about rebirth. It used to puzzle me early on when I began to share the Vedanta and I got in front of Hindus and they were going, so what? This is nothing new to us. But you see jaws drop or you see eyebrows raised when you tell this to people in the West and you want them to take it seriously and they see that you are serious. It's not just some sort of new age philosophy you're proposing to them that's been snatched out of a hat somewhere. You've realized it yourself based on these ancient teachings. You're trying to teach it to them so they'll remember that this is the case. And so they'll then make a conclusion, oh, I see, my body-mind mechanisms are complex and it's going from world to world and it's all a dream. I mean, it can't make it any simpler and more succinct than that. So that's my review for today. These shorter classes, I'm trying to make my reviews a little bit shorter and condense them. So remember about what and where then, okay? And the two things that go with them. What's transmigrating? The body-mind mechanism, but the Atman doesn't. So don't leave one out of the equation. Where is it going to? It's going to heaven, to earth, to hell. And what is that called? A dream. Or a projection of mind. Sankalpa. A power of the mind. Not just one mind, billions of minds are doing this. That's a lot of power. If 7 billion here can hold a candle up for peace somewhere in the world, you see, then it would make a great change. All of the peace lovers like that idea. And it doesn't happen very often that everyone gets on the same page, but this is what would happen if philosophically we got on the same page like India has been on for millennia. That they wouldn't have these same problems in their youth and in their parents. Lack of dharma is that problem. Lack of getting these teachings. Lack of taking them seriously once you did get them. Or never having heard of them for lifetimes until Smriti. You don't remember it. Seems like an odd theory, you see, to religionists and people here in the West that you would think that way. But I'm convinced that even people in religion know that they have other births. You'll catch them saying that without them even knowing it. So whatever the case may be, to bring it forward consciously is another thing. So we're going to move on to this third W question, which is why. Why is it going from place to place? Why is it dragging itself from birth to death? And in that way, we can look at this very interesting and unique chart from the story of Yoga Vishishta, about Sukra. Now, I was holding this book up, I don't know, a month or two ago, and I think I still have the old papers in it from that series of class we were giving on Sri Ram's Discourse of Divine Discontent. I still have my own notes in here and the old chart here, and the notes written on it where I was going with that. So now I've taken that and I've marked it here at this story, which I named in English, the illusory transmigration and subsequent samadhi of Sukra. Now, Sukra was the son of Brigu. If you say Brigu amongst knowers of Veda and Upanishad, people hush up. You see, oh, well, that was one of the greatest rishis that ever lived. Even among rishis, he was great, and all the rishis are great. So Brigu is sitting in meditation, and he's practicing sadhana for the entire worlds, all the worlds that are dreamlike. Nonetheless, he's trying to wake people up from the dream of these worlds, because he's woken up from that dream. And he's in an ever-awake state now, called that yogic insomnia, like our founder, like Sixon, used to say. So wake up from that, and then live in a state of an ever-awake state. You see, like that's your third eye open, and don't worry, your body can still rest if it wants. Your eyes can close. Most often, you can close them in meditation, open them, and so forth. You can go into waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, and all of that still goes on. But the ever-awake state means that this center has been arrived at. You have arrived at the sixth of 7 of these fantastic vortexes of spiritual energy inside the marvelous human body that is associated with the various centers of the marvelous human body, which is an image of the divine, isn't it? It should be. That's what we'd like it to see, so that even the body would be a temple. So in that way, then, Brigu is always in meditation. So take a look at the chart as I go through this. I'm going to read just little parts of this so it doesn't take a long time, because I don't like to read at these classes. You can do that on your own. But we'll use little sentences here I've marked to take us through this illusory projection of the ego. Okay, so again, body-mind mechanism with the ego aboard, dreaming itself from place to base. So Brigu has stopped this. So he's like sitting in one place now, in samadhi. And his son Sukra has learned this from him. You see, he's another great rishi. But the thing about Sukra is that, he made a mistake in his sankalpa. It should have remained atmic sankalpa. You see here, I think it's up here, atmic sankalpa. So there's mayic sankalpa, which billions of people are engaging in. Dream life with no meaning behind it, with no substance to it, with no goal to attain, except pleasure and pain in rounds, births and deaths in rounds, and forgetfulness of the fact that this is what you've been doing with your time. Time itself being an illusory, and space that you're going to and moving through also being a part of Maya. So it's this grand illusion that people are using their mayic sankalpa. They're lost in this process. It's like letting your mind just go do anything it wants, see, instead of having any kind of discrimination at all and holding yourself back and saying, I don't know if I want to do that again. Maybe I've done it enough. But if you've forgotten that you've done it so many times, there's a problem. Hence the title of this class and this whole series. The role of retentive memory, or memory, Smriti, in the process of remembering that you've had many births and many deaths. Now, even Krishna in the Gita told Arjuna, we both had many births and deaths, but I remember all mine. So remember is synonymous with consciousness, is synonymous with awareness, you see. So he's aware that he's taking these. This is called atmic sankalpa. If you have dissolved, as I just chanted, mind into the intellect into the ego into the witness, things are getting good now, witness into the Atman, then all of these things have been dissolved as if they were dreamlike. They were part of a dream I was engaging in. My consciousness cannot go back to them anymore unless it recreates them somehow. And people have recreating these mechanisms called tattvas all the time, right on down to the 5 senses and the 5 elements here. They're just available because that's what's held out to the embodying soul, is to create worlds of name and form and time and space based on cause and effect in their own mind. That's Maya in the mind. So you're never in Maya. It's Maya that's in you. Who am I quoting? Swami Vivekananda. You're never in Maya. It's Maya that's in you, so get rid of it. Right? So get rid of it. So Brigu has done this. And then Shukra, his son, has learned this from him. So here on this chart, they're sitting side by side. On the other end of this chart is Yama, the Lord of Death. Now, we brought him up in satsang yesterday and had a good talk about him, or in God blogs, I think. So we're talking a lot about the God of Death. Dharma Raja, he's called, or Yama. And he's a power of transition, because he's not, nothing's ever born, so it can never die. And Atman, we've already heard this now, right, about even the first W question. We've clarified this. So nothing really ever gets born and never dies. It just thinks it is. But if it knows that it's just a projection, then that thought is just a dream that it's having. And it can have these dreams ad infinitum without getting swept away, without having its memory covered over. And so Brigu and Shukra are sitting in this condition. Let me get my chart out of this so I can guide you down this chart. And at the same time, remind you that we're talking about now, where is it? I'm sorry, why is it transmigrating? Why is this happening? And probably a good second why question is, why can't we stop it from happening, like Brigu has done? So if we have examples of stopping the mind from vibrating, if you want to get just right to the point, stop the waves of the mind. Yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha. Being in union with God is nirodha, destroying the chitta, vrittis, waves of the mind. It's the second sutra in yoga. Second sutra. So right away you've got beings concurring about this. Stop the mind from vibrating, as being a way at first at least to get your peace of mind back. You see, they enjoy eternal peace and ecstatic bliss if they can take the whole thing back to Brahman and do this process of evolution consciously. Then they're past masters that can do this, past masters of their consciousness. If they send it out to move, they can retract it. But others can't do that. It goes out against their will, gets stuck in these tattvas, like on matter, or on power, or on money, or on desire, or on wealth and things. It gets stuck there, and they can't get their consciousness back from them, from those things. And so then they've lost their peace of mind. Backdrop here is, of course, this beautiful scene in the country of taking these wagon loads of product to the marketplace, and in this ancient time where and our great rishis here then, Brigu and his son, are sitting in this state of nirvikalpa. And if you can see it there in the chart, upper right hand in the bubble. And they're engaging in atmic sankalpa if they engage at all. That is, they could see a scene like this, but see it from a witness standpoint and know what's going on there and know it to be a dream of so many souls, or a village, or a city, or a world. And they're just witnessing this and saying, I see how Maya is working. And God saved a lot of them, you see, but save me from them. They're not going there. So, the long and the short of it with Sukra is that his father's, they're both doing a kind of very high-minded sadhana. Call it Advaita Vedanta sadhana if you want. So Brigu is going into these flights of just no mind. And he doesn't need memory. It'll come back to him when his consciousness returns to him. It's like built into his memory. So while Brigu's not watching and not aware of what's going on outside, Shukra falls from that state of practicing samadhi and falls into the mind. That's the next level. See, the mind with its powers of sankalpic projection. So here's the risk. See, when the mind becomes a separate entity, remember what we said, chitta buddhi ahamkara, basically the intellect, the dual mind, manas, and ahamkara, the ego, get together. That's this threefold mind. Later on they added chitta to it, which means the thoughts. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. So you've got this antakarana here. And its very nature is to give rise to sankalpa. It's not like you can just say, okay, mind, I'm with you. You see, no, as soon as you turn your back on it, it's already, you turn around and it's produced a bunch of worlds. You see, a bunch of avenues for a bunch of nadis for your consciousness to flow in. And Maya is behind those, and it's very attracting. All the way down to the 5 elements of nature on earth, people are going to follow this row, this nadi. There's no word for it except nerve. It doesn't really do it because we think bodies. But the mind has nerves too, and they're called nadis. And these aren't the brain's veins. These are the nadis or channels in the mind that souls come and go by. Where is it that it's transmigrating to? It's transmigrating into the mind which originated it. So this is all going on. One of the best illustrations is dream, like a dream, because we wake up from those many worlds this morning, and we had many bodies, we had many experiences. There were many worlds we saw, different slices of life we were subject to, and they're gone. He says that here in this reading, if I ever get to it. But mind and its powers, with the power of sankalpic projection, is a mighty thing to face off with. You see, it's something that even somebody like Sukra might get waylaid or swayed by what the mind can show it in this vast array of worlds. That's why when he looks, he sees with this seeking heaven mind, he comes aware of this beautiful goddess called Vishvachi, and she's in the Indra Loka. Now if you could look out all of these lokas that we talk about, Bhur Loka, Bhuvar Loka, Swar Loka, Jana Loka, Tabar Loka, Mahar Loka, Sachi Loka. These are all spread out in the mind as divine realms. This is where people desire to go to. And they can fall from those upper 4 to the lower 3 where transmigration is taking place. This is where birth and death and all that. And you lose your memory of the beautiful things, the things that are beyond mere desire that you experienced just before samadhi or just before deep sleep. And you just bring a vestige of them back. And those people here on earth who remember wonderful experiences and get attracted to spirituality are those very beings who are bringing back some memory of what they saw there into this very body and remembering it and then basing their life on it, like Dharma. Dharma is designed to call you back to those memories. So they shouldn't be allowed to be covered over by any way, right? So Indra Loka then is one of those great lokas, and Indra is the king of the gods. So he's like presiding over the 3 realms of transmigration. And there are great souls there. Vishvachi is one of these great goddess. He sees her, he goes to Indra Loka. So this attracts him to Indra Loka, which is not yet in the realm of the 3 transmigrating worlds. He doesn't have to worry about falling that far, but he will. And then he sports with her for Mahayugas. He creates for her a world free of distractions where they can just love each other and no one's there and nothing can distract him, and he puts a pall of gloom around that realm that nobody can penetrate. No soul can get into it. And so it's just them and their love. You see. Sounds ideal, doesn't it? And so they're sporting like this. It's a kind of very high-minded sankalpa. And it's still based in this consciousness of Atman. You see, Indra is a very powerful, he's the god of all gods. So this isn't a low heaven or something where forgetfulness takes place so easy. All the beings in Indra's realm are saying, well, look at him shine, you know. The only thing greater than him is the Trinity. So if we just stay near him, we can get to the Trinity. And if we can get to the Trinity, we can get to transcendence. So there are beings that are having darshan constantly with this highest level of consciousness that they have been able to attain. That's a realm, you see. So it reminds me of my teacher saying, you here in America, you worship your presidents. But in India, we worship our seers. So those are two realms, basically. In India, you've got this access to these great luminaries because they're what's valued, even beyond the royalty of England and beyond the presidents of America. They're looking at these great seers who occupy these very high worlds after death. And if they do come to Earth at all, they do so armed with the Dharma, armed with Atmagyan, and saving thousands of souls every time they show up. We could mention names right now, like the founders of religions. So, to give you a traditional taste of it, now that we've come this far down to this dream, this great dream of Sukra, we hear some words from Vasishtha, who's telling the story to Ram. You remember the setup of that at the court of the king. He says, the dream of this earth, with its many lives, in space and time, is like invisible ink on a manuscript, or an image appearing in a sheet of glass. It's a reflection, and reflections have no substance. But its underlying foundation has substance. So we need to contemplate that living substratum, O Ram, and manfully withdraw the fascinated mind, excited one moment and disappointed the next, from all surface enjoyments and appearances. It is this indivisible Brahman that everyone really longs for, yet overlooking it, beings accept instead all that rises off of it like steam and spray from an ocean. This steady stream of unreal phenomena taken to be real, assumed to be possessible. But what misery and shocked surprise await those who, drowning in the dangerous river of Maya, would grab onto an alligator for flotation, thinking it to be a log. Such suffering is both illusory and unnecessary. Just as a soapstone may have many figures carved into it, so too, in that one Brahman, all worlds and lives manifest themselves. So like, take Brahman as just one vast substance and start cutting things in it. So everything is in Brahman. That's the substratum of everything. These dreams also being had in Brahman. They're being had in Maya, and that Maya is in Brahman, Sri Ramakrishna says, like poison is in the snake. But Brahman doesn't suffer from that poison, does it? Like the snake doesn't suffer from its own poison. This is all illusory play, he said, looking at the young Ram. It would not be quite so bad if this was all there was to it. One lifetime lived in ignorance, then awaken, and realize the nature of the dream and give it up. But Maya holds within it the possibility for an endless succession of lifetimes. Not only of the linear type, mind you, but even lives stacked atop one another simultaneously. This dubious happenstance came to King Lavanya, as you have heard, but it also fell to the lot of Sukra in the story I'm about to tell you. He was a son of an illumined and famed Rishi Brigu. This lesson was unasked for, which was duly learned by that rare personage, Shukra, to his everlasting amazement. Born of a Brahmin and possessed of good karma and samskaras, Sukra's projected life as a son of a priest afforded him company with seekers after enlightenment and freedom from embodiment. As a matter of course, and due to his inherent good sense, he grew attracted to austerity and began practicing austerities at an early age. But before he could complete this period of spiritual practices, he became enamored of a goddess, married, and gained a son. With an increasing fondness for this boy, he next forgot his earlier vow and turned his focus to the world in order to raise a child. The crucial mistake was him forgetting his spiritual aims due to the insinuation of the world, and it left him helpless against Maya and its influences, and thus his mind fostered a growing attachment for the world and its concerns. In short, O Ram, the son of Brigu fell from his true state and entered into a series of projected lifetimes as if in a dream. So she's telling the young Ram, who wants to know about why people incarnate and suffer. This is the main thing that's bothering him, just like it bothered Buddha thousands of years later. He was also son of a king, the Sakya clan. And so both of these thousands of years apart in India are these great sensitive illumined souls who can't understand, even with all their higher understanding, why people would continue to want to be reborn over and over and over again, to enjoy things that won't fulfill them and instead end up in suffering. So it happens to the best of them. So it happened to Shukra here. That might be all I want to read from here, so that we don't just tell you a story and do it in that fashion. But if you can see, if you follow the chart and keep remembering that we're talking about why, or actually we had who and we had what, but on following on the questions of that is why and when. Why and when actually kind of have a connection with each other, because time goes in cycles, and when time goes in cycles, so do these rebirths follow cycles of time. So you can see that what is incarnating and why it's doing that is connected to these cycles of time. And Lord Buddha wanted off of the Kala chakra, the cycle of time. And so his teaching, when he was living 500 or so years before Jesus, his teaching in India was to get off this cycle of time, separate yourself from the ancestors who are caught on it. You don't necessarily have to separate yourself from the ancestors who are getting free of it. You worship them. It's called Pitru Yaga, or worship of your ancestors. But those ancestors that are caught on it, you need to divorce yourself from them so you can go back later and convince them to give up this dream of life, this thirst for life, forever quenched. Try and tell them that, which both Ram and Buddha were wont to do, especially Lord Buddha. So we've seen how Shukra has fallen from the side of his father in a very high state of practice of samadhi. His father, already having attained it, is now not aware that he's taking on this series of dreams in his head, in his mind. Where do you go, my son? Sort of like teachers watching students in class, daydreaming, looking into space. Where have you gone? They've gone into some world in their mind, into a sankalpa, and they're just like that until you bump them or call them back, and all of a sudden they're back in their five senses again, and this is the physical world. But meanwhile, they just had this excursion into their heads, basically, into the sankalpa process of their minds. It's a daydream, and it's gone like that. So this is what's happening as Brigu sits there next to his son, who's sitting there in his subtle body, but in his mind, he's off and away. He's having this magnificent series of lifetimes with Vishvachi, but there's the devil to pay there in that case. So following from that position due to sankalpic projection, due to his not being able to control his mind from desiring heaven, basically. A very high heaven, no doubt, in this case. Then the next thing that happens to him is that he sees the worlds below. And his mind, now readily available and open to the power of sankalpa, gazes upon the earth in the moonlight one night. It's a beautiful scene. The moon is flooding its light over this rice field where this farmer lives and his wife. And so he just becomes enamored of this beautiful scene inside of himself in a lower world that's being dreamed simultaneously by thousands, millions, and now billions of other people. They're all holding it, you see. And so he's looking in on their sankalpa. Like Thirabrigu, he would be saying, yeah, I see all that happening. That's what the lower worlds are about. May they awaken to their spirituality as soon as possible and be free, like I am, you see. But Sukra has not got that kind of power of detachment yet. His mind is already just fallen into Indra's loka. So now from Indra's loka, he's seeing all the lokas that Indra presides over, and one of those is the Bur loka. So he sees this beautiful moonlit night, you see, and he broods on the moon's rays, it says here. And he enters into the prana of snow falling. So on that beautiful moonlit winter night, snow starts to fall. It makes the scene even more beautiful. So his prana, following the nadi of his mind in the sankalpic process, attaches to that scene, and he becomes the prana in the moving thing in the picture, which is snow. And it falls onto the ground. Falls onto the paddy field is the next part of the story. I could be reading this, I'm taking you through it quick. And on the paddy field, it nourishes the rice and becomes food. So he has become food, you see. By the powers of attention of his mind in the sankalpa process, he has become the five elements. He has become the food. And he will soon become the body and the enjoyer of the food. I'm sure many of you are remembering the teachings in the Gita about that, how to see Brahman and everything. But unfortunately, that thought is not foremost on his mind. The enchantment of Maya is foremost. Brahman's Maya is foremost on his mind. So then the next thing that happens is that rice paddy, that food, is harvested and eaten by the farmer, who happens to be a Brahmin priest too, or a Brahmin caste. And then it's converted into sperm and given to the wife in the act of procreation. And then I put there the quote from the Vedas as a reminder here, right at this line. Basically, verily in this universe, all is food. Everything is food. After that, you see the next substratum of lifetimes that now have to be lived, because he's identified with matter. And so you see here it has a birth of Sukra as a priest's son. Then when he's born as a priest's son, he's of a high-minded nature. We know that already about him. So he immediately starts to practice tapas. That's austerity. So he's not having an ordinary lifetime, ordinary run of lifetime. He's still keeping a hold of some of the memory of his spirituality and sharpening it with doing austerity. He's got a natural inbred samskara for this. And then he marries and has offspring. And that way he becomes enslaved to the world through the Ishanatrayam, spouse, children, and making a living. It's a triple bondage. Ishanatrayam. A series of lifetimes then ensues. This is where it becomes these, what we were hearing here from Vashishta, is that it's not just one lifetimes, but a stack of lifetimes here. That's being, like a stack of pancakes that's being shoved at you at breakfast, you see. I'm just going to butter and honey the whole thing and then start eating it. So he's got a series of lifetimes coming his way because of tripping up in the higher realms and identifying with the lower realms, entering into the realm of rebirth, the realm of transmigration, Bur, Buvar, Svarlokas, and going around in cycles like that. So the first, actually it's very beautiful written, but the first one of these is a fragrance. In this way did Sukra dream himself through the experiences of being everything from a fragrance on a breeze to the beloved son of illumined Muni. That covers the gamut of all of these lifetimes. In this fashion, so along the dream way, nicely put, along the dream way, this way of Sankalpa, he found himself extremely restful as a forest of bamboo, floated regally on pristine mountain waters as a white swan, slithered through a dense forest in search of prey as a huge boa constrictor. Then he moved along in the body of a hunter, killing stags and other four-legged animals in the thick woods, only to find himself incarnated as a stag, panting as he ran through the forest to escape a hunter on his tail. A powerful chief of the hill tribes with his next incarnation, then a royal king. After this royal birth and its boons gave way to desire for several more, he became the king of the Vidyadharas. They're Vidya, wisdom, Dara holder. They're this holder of wisdom in the traditions in India. That's a high birth. And finally a king of a solar line. That's a very high birth, but not as high as the next one. Finally the king of a solar line, like your father seated here before us, O Ram. In other words, that's King Dasaratha sitting there in the court. And that is how he became a Shaivite guru and then a famed guru of a solar line, a birth which is duly ended, a birth which duly ended his final desire for glory and led him to incarnate as the son of a Muni, a birth very difficult of attainment, O Prince. At present he has taken his final birth as a rishi named Vasudeva. This is the line of incarnation Shukra took, as sought after and uncovered by the subtle powers of the omniscient seers. How do we know this? Because Bhrigu, when he woke up out of his samadhi, saw that Shukra was gone. He went to the Lord, and his body was falling in death. He went to the Lord of Death and said, "What have you done to my son?" And he threatened death, because Bhrigu was beyond death. So death became very frightened of Bhrigu, and so had to tell him, we can follow the Akashic record, basically. Come with me and we'll meditate and we'll see where Shukra went. So they traced his line. All of this would happen to him from Indra's Loka all the way down to the Bur Loka, which is quite a long ways in inner space terms. And then saw as all of these lifetimes he took, as if reading one instance of time. See where all that happened, because they're transcendent of time. They're not caught in the illusion that it takes seconds and minutes and years and centuries and millennia and Mahayugas and so forth. It's all just unfolding in a dream. So they're looking at this and reading that record of how Shukra went, found him, and that's why he says here, then now his latest birth is this birth of a rishi. You see, and he's now we find out one of the reasons why he fell there, to satisfy that desire for glory. So it's one of the Mike evolutes, vainglory it's called. A lot of beings of high natures are born here to rule over earth. They have vainglory. They want to dominate over all these lands and all these people and all this wealth. It's a more gross version of what Indra Loka is like, because Indra also has that desire, strong desire, to oversee all these realms beneath him, at his feet. See? So that's why he's the god of the gods. He's even presiding over the lands of the gods and dictating the terms there. So this is a great desire in the gods. It's one of the reasons why the human beings can transcend the worlds quicker than the gods can in this tradition, by just simply seeking enlightenment and giving up this power for domination. And of course down here, power of domination has become more of an occult power than it is just some sort of individual desire that somebody needs to satisfy. So this has been given in this series so that we can see why this transmigration process is taking place. This is a good example because it's from a very high soul that's doing this. So it shows that there's ways to fall out of this grace, fallen from grace kind of idea, and why a person has to be very on guard against the mind's powers of sankalpa and vikalpa, especially if they're flavored at all or tainted with desire. So here's the why problem, desire, and what impels the body-mind mechanism to visit heavens and earths and hells, and why it needs to satisfy that desire, get over it once and for all, and attain enlightenment, freedom from all desire. And sankalpa, vikalpa would be the unique way in which India, in Sanskrit, gives us this teaching. As far as worlds go, sometimes we sing about that because there's the example of Bhrigu. He's actually transcended all these worlds. So next to Sukra, he's this great rishi, and Sukra is just this rishi that has tasted enlightenment, but obviously has in the taste for enlightenment, has this power, this desire for glory, for glory, and which trips up a lot of gods in their bid, a lot of souls in their bid for enlightenment. They will go only to so far, like the realm of the ancestors or the realm of the suras and asuras. And these are all outlined in the ancient tradition, all by way of India's great teachings of the Dharma. But if you're talking about Bhrigu, then talking about a soul that is sitting above all of this, is transcendent of it. And sometimes we can sing about that. Brahmada sura gana katam matra shanti svargado davo vasham katam matra shanti yaryekarupam mamalam paramartam tata janamritam samarasam gaganopamoham nirneti neti vimalo hikatam vadami nishesha shesha vimalo hikatam vadami nirlinga linga mivalo hikatam vadami Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. So the Avatut sings about this issue of worlds. In the Supreme Brahman, which I have realized, all the gods have dissolved. Therefore, all the many worlds and lokas that the gods preside over have also melted away. all soluble into that. The three worlds are thus seen as a dreamlike projection. I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. Nameless, formless, timeless, spaceless. What to say? The Supreme Brahman is neither this nor that. Beings inhabiting and identifying with bodies cannot fathom that which has no body. I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. The Avatut, ever free of actions, engages in the highest acts free of karma. He enjoys non-attachment in the state of seeming attachment. Dwelling in the body, he enjoys unimaginable joy of bodilessness. I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So this is given so that we have this example before us. Of a soul that's beyond transmigration. So a very good way out of Lord Vashishtha's yoga scripture of poising Brigu next to Sukra and then the Avatut in there, and how some of these souls have maintained their non-dual awareness. And so they can come into a body and be a Jivan Mukta. So we've had teachings on Jivan Mukta before. On Jivan Mukti, so it's a living liberated condition. So this is how we also can trace those great words that they use in Sanskrit that they assign to certain souls that are liberated from all these processes that other beings get so entangled in. Again, back to that question, why when the bliss of the Atman is waiting, one would want to take on this body-mind mechanism go to an imagined world based on your desire to do things that can never be fulfilled, and the suffering that comes back for them. Pretty soon you start reasoning it out like that, and even the seers scratch their head. Sri Ramakrishna was like that too. He said that's the one time when God is helpless, when the embodied soul won't wake up when the time is right and free itself from this cycle of birth and death. Last week we had that quote by Lord Buddha, like birds caught in the fowler's net. They never wake up. They always get caught again and again in this process of what he called the Kala Chakra. Now, in some time remaining, we can take apart the why-when problem by looking at what a samskara is. Sometimes we call these two old war horses of a chart out of the closet, dust them off, bring them out, and give the teaching of samskara to people. There's Sri Ramakrishna's quote to start us off. Remember, a samskara then is a mental impression. That body-mind mechanism that's going from place to place is full of them. That body-mind mechanism that is witnessing is free of them, or only has samadhi, samskaras of samadhi, right? As Father of Yoga has taught us. Get rid of all those old samskaras, that your old memories and everything. Forget your personality, as Holy Mother said, and remember your true self, your Atman. So Sri Ramakrishna says about that, the body is born to work out its karmas from past lives, or to be of service to others. It is all up to the inborn tendencies, called samskaras. Repeated births in this world make one believe that Maya is real. So that's that convincing power of Maya again, and it comes back again in the same condition it is. That's where generations of doctors, lawyers, workers, farmers, and so forth, are just imprints on the mind from lifetimes it's lived, as if Sukha could have just remained farming, or could have just taken more incarnations as an animal, or taking more incarnations as a teacher, till finally transcended all of that and had that desire, deep desire for enlightenment come upon him again. And the end of that story, by the way, because we probably won't get to it, is that he does rejoin Bhrigu from his birth as a rishi and rise into himself again. And the body that was sagging there, sitting next to Bhrigu, that subtle body, all of a sudden got breath in it again, got prana in it again, sat up straight, and Bhrigu knew that his son had returned from this long, many lifetime journey that just happened in 1 second to Bhrigu. And they sat together and then went into samadhi together. And Sukha had then fulfilled his last desire, which down there in the Bur Loka he had to go so far to do, was to satisfy this need for glory, for domination over others. In a good way, in that case, not an asuric way. But nonetheless, this is what Sri Ramakrishna is talking about here. Karmas from past lives come. Some beings offset that by just becoming good karma yogis and yoginis. They like to come to serve others. So this chart, best to start down here as at the bottom. You can see the temple there, which is the Taj Mahal, and it was built for his beloved by this prince. And Taj Mahal is there in their samskara is the idea. They've got this in one lifetime. And so it shows as a sort of example what's in the mind of beings, even beings who were princes and kings, because Sukra went through that too. He became a king of a solar line even. And let's see if I can, in the middle there, samskara, a collection of old impressions stagnating in the mind is one definition for it. That's a collection of them. Then as just a samskara itself in the upper left, it says, in a mental impression is a mental impression formed via desire-based actions with the propensity to cause rebirth. That's probably as succinct and short a sentence as you can define a samskara, because don't go running to the Western dictionary, it won't be there. In the Sanskrit dictionary, it can be quite extensive, but if you want to slim it down, a mental impression formed in the mind because of past desire-based actions and with a propensity to cause rebirth. If we have time for it today, we can look at the breakdown of what that's like in the other samskara chart. But going on here, and fairly quickly too, because it's not really all that complex, you can see these boxes. On the lower left, people come with samskaras of root ignorance and tendencies towards cyclic transmigration. This would be maybe the territory of the father of yoga, trying to get you over the desire for rebirth. There are 5 great problems in yoga, right? Kleshas: ignorance, attachment, aversion, egotism, clinging to life. Well, clinging to life also is fear of death. So clinging to life is this tendency to be reborn again and again. You cannot wait to get back into the body. And so this is always covering up your true nature, this embodied existence. Body-mind mechanism is the transmigrating portion of everything on a foundation that we just looked at, which is unmoving. So these souls develop this ability to remember the unmoving substratum and see that it's shining with the light of bliss. as we said, when you dissolve things, I chanted at the beginning of this class, you dissolve things back. When they do that, they become the practitioners of blissful dissolution, and they get vyapya shantim and paramam bhajasva. They get eternal peace and unimaginable bliss out of that, like Sri Ramakrishna. So they somehow retain this ability to always see the one underlying the many, if you want to put it simpler terms. But other beings, never having cultivated that in their life, maybe haven't even built up the samskaras to recognize that there's a higher freedom, and just earthbound, matter-bound, like animals. It's bestial. It's good word. It's just about the beasts dying and being born and living off nature. So the human being is higher run than that. So it's very ignoble to fall to that position as far as India is concerned. Another samskara there, birth, gender, life, personality, death, rebirth, that defines more this tendency towards cyclic transmigration. Then there's desire for pleasure and power. Well, we just looked at Shukra. He must have had some residue of that. That was one that was in his mind that caused him to fall into Indra's loka, then to earth. Because you go from this highest loka of the rishis, which is probably Tapar loka, and then all of a sudden you fall to Indra loka. And then you fall to Bor loka. It's like that's three great leaps or falls that you've taken when you had it made in Tapar loka. So this is the power of a samskara, or a desire. There's a desire in our contemporary lives that causes people to get into so much trouble and cause themselves and others so much suffering. Like the desire for war. It's unthinkable that we should hurt each other. Unthinkable, unimaginable, untenable. But there it is. And people are even walking around thinking it's the thing to do. So this is how untoward and backwards the mind, guided by desire-based samskara, is. It's not all depressing, though, don't worry. As you go around here, these samskaras become very good, which is the point. So let's follow them. The next one is craving, ego, obsession, urge to dominate, and body identification. Also quite animalistic. All of this is accompanied by habits and attachments in the mind. There's one that just simply says covetousness. Thou shalt not covet the property of others, is the second sloka, I think, in one of the early slokas in the Ishavasya Upanishad. Thou shalt not covet the goods of others. So all of these things very much attached to world domination, desire for worlds, lower worlds, and continual war and contention and violence amongst people. So if you were, again, taking it on the level of Father of Yoga, he'd want you to be ahimsa first, non-violent. Then I can teach you yoga. Then non-covetousness could come later, and truthfulness could come. And countenance, which withdraws your mind from things that attract you, could come then. And then the niyamas could be taken up then. And you'd just be remembering your divine qualities at this point. So there you see the next, getting toward the top of the image. Agency, name, fame, selfishness, attraction to wealth, lassitude. So it's still, a lot of this has to do with the tamo rajo guna. See, it's either very restless to achieve things and then getting spent and bored and tired of things and becoming tamasic. And then rajas returns, you want to go get them again, and then the same thing happens again. Sattva isn't happening yet. You see, that's balance, peace. And pure sattva is probably not going to happen unless you can have sattva and keep it for a while. And that's called a mixed samskara there. Mixed samskaras come next. So these were all pretty heavily weighed down samskaras, guna-speaking rajas and tamas. The next level of samskara, leading more towards positive samskaras, is where you get energy moving. That's prana. And morality visits the mind. You wouldn't want to covet anything. What to speak of your neighbor's wife, you wouldn't even want to covet money, and you wouldn't want to covet power and all these things that you're now beginning to see through as weights on the mind. Proper orientation then would visit your mind, and people would fall into work in a more selfless way, like altruism. You can see the main box there, actions, merits, and deeds we're getting into now. So beings are beginning to be born with, don't just look at this as a samskara of a mind that's already manifested, but these are samskaras in the mind that have been in the mind previously, therefore they're making their appearance again in this lifetime. Or there's samskaras in the mind that will afford the soul to have a better lifetime in the future, after they work their way through and purify their minds of even the smallest little residue, like Sukra did. So this is where aptitude, higher learning, positivity, religious faith come about. And the mental capacity and intelligence dawns. That's what the seers, the Dharma teachers, the gurus and so forth on this earth are looking for. Have they sharpened their intelligence? Have they awakened their intelligence yet? And how much capacity do they have that I can inject them with this Brahmagyana? How much of the needle can I inject into them? And can they take a lot, or can they just take a little? Because all of this, when digested, turns towards service. The selfless service is higher than altruism then, here, as far as Vedanta is concerned. Service, wisdom, compassion, peace, and illumination, those, if you have samskaras like that, then it's of course a sign of previous illumined births. You've come to earth before, and you've mastered these things already, and there you can't say, God is unjust because that person has all these fine qualities and I don't, so I'm jealous of him or whatever. And jealousy and envy is a big problem, both in the West and in India, as Vivekananda saw in this day and age. He said jealousy was the worst of all things, that people couldn't be happy for the accomplishments of others. So basically, if you have somebody show up with all of this intact, it's not a matter of just or unjust. It's a matter of this soul did his homework and realized, and this soul fell from that, didn't use the time wisely because of all these distractions on the other side of the fence there. That's called a very positive samskara. So we went from the negative samskaras to the mixed samskaras to the positive samskaras to give us a run through. And it wasn't all that complicated, was it? So let's take up, since Vashishtha has really been our early guide for the teaching of Sankalpa, Vikalpa, and Samskara. Let's look at a couple of his quotes. He says, "The liberated soul embodies at will, utilizing the subtle force of pure desires, whereas other beings are dragged back into form via karma-based actions and desires, and the many samskaras that are duly formed thereby." So Vashishtha again having a very succinct, unique way of putting this into one sentence or two, like the father of yoga did. He also says, through the newly engendered body, that's the new rebirth, a series of dreamlike lives are conjured up by the mind's power of sankalpa, and the residue of egoic actions done therein collect in the mind as samskaras. So, evolution theory, creation theory, things that we've been raised in for many lifetimes in America, what to speak of Europe, that are pinioned inside of our thinking process. That's how the way we conduct our next existence. Like they used to say, just look in the mirror, right? And you see all the karmas from your past life there. How you look, I mean, this is a physiognomy of how the seers can even read a person from their physical appearance. What to speak of getting near them and seeing how they think. Oh, I see you've got a good way of thinking there, or I see you've got an aberration in your mind. This needs to be gotten rid of. Let's use this yoga psychology and purify the mind. So he says here, these pure, subtle force of pure desires need to be applied to the mind. So, like I was saying, evolutionary theory, creation theory, let's study the samskara theory. This is what we need to be looking at now. This is higher education, that word's already taken. This is even higher than higher education. That is, it's not in the school yet. You're not getting taught this dharma in the schools, but it should be. It's an error on the part of the society not to put this into the curriculum, so that you go and study these very secrets of your soul in school, and everyone is given this equally, and they can work out their own karmas then, because it's not happening otherwise, with the idea of going to heaven and just returning to earth, or with the idea of evolution and that's it, no involution. So this is what we need to be studying. We need to be picking up these charts that I'm giving you, these teachings that India is giving you, and the transmission of the great gurus and rishis. And we need to be sitting there with them and remaking our samskaras. No, I'm not going to think like that anymore. This is the superior way to think. So out go the old samskaras, in come the new samskaras. Out go the new samskaras, in come samskaras of samadhi. Hey, I'm myself again. I have peace of mind, I have bliss. Nothing gets to me anymore. I can face off with death. Death has to die. As Brigu did. You could even go to death and say, what did you do to my son? And make death shiver, see. I don't know how much time we have, but we have probably enough time to actually complete this why, where. You see, so, I'm sorry, why, when, isn't it? Because we already did who, where. So why, when? Why is it transmigrating like this? We see that it's, if we don't want to wait for it for my review next week, we can say it's compelled to do this by desires and desire-based sankalpa, and by samskara. So here's two new words we'll learn: sankalpa, samskara, both starting with S, and both Sanskrit, and other than in India and in Sanskrit, you won't find the meaning to them. What to speak of putting your mind upon them, unwrapping them, finding out what they do mean, and all of a sudden having the whole rebirth process make sense to you, and then freeing yourself from it once and for all. Have no hope for me, for the world, forevermore. I'm gone and gone forever, is how Lord Buddha put that. So he woke up. He says, you can call me anything you like, but one thing you have to say about me is that I have awakened. I am the Buddha. I have awakened. So this was in India 500 years before Jesus. That's very recent for India. And this great soul sat under a tree and got this all together for us and showed us how to, since it had been thousands of years since Ram got it together under the teachings of Lord Vashishta, which we just looked at, then it had to happen again centuries later, millennia later, and another great soul like Buddha come out and declare this to the world, So that when we practice Buddhism today, or when we study Buddhism today, from whatever religion we call our own, that these teachings will come through to us. Praticca samutpata, that everything's interdependent arising. That's just cause and effect going on there, like Samkhya. And all of these things are conditionings that are happening. So they can take a part of samskara in a different way in Buddhism than we do, but it's really pretty much the same thing. It's got all those problems of thirst and desire and conditionings from past lifetimes, fear of death. You look at the nidanas in Buddhism, they all just, yeah, that's Indian philosophy there. So we need to, if we call ourselves Buddhists, or say that we've studied Buddhism, we need to work these into our life, just like we would study these sankalpas and samskaras, which are way older, all the way back to Vishishta, way older than Lord Buddha's appearance on earth. A samskara skandha is even a greater problem. So if we want to look deep into the darkness, into the swamp of the mind, you might say here that this is where complexes on top of complexes happen. I'm glad I remember that word, because in Western psychology and so forth, a complex is a good word. It's just that you have to connect it to its origin in previous lifetimes. That's where, as far as it goes, it's just one lifetime. So a complex would be like a samskara, but a samskara suggests itself very far back in your chain of rebirths, and you want to snap that chain. So Lord Buddha, speaking of him, he says, the discerning person straightens the mind, which is fickle, unsteady, and difficult to restrain, just like the skilled fletcher straightens the shaft of the arrow. I remember my second grade teacher's name, Mrs. Fletcher. I always wondered where that name came from. So a fletcher is someone who's an arrow maker. And you have to sand down all the rough edges off of those branches that you're going to use for arrows that you're going to sell to the king's army and so forth. So basically, just like that, Buddha watching and seeing somebody perform their profession, and say that's what you have to do with your mind. It's like, the woodcutter suddenly became a diamond cutter, is one beautiful Zen koan. So you start, all the things you're doing out here have come from the mind, but when they come from the mind, they come with defects. Yet the lives of other souls are free of those defects. Their minds are pure, so it says you must go back into your mind and do this purification process and come out with a pure mind, with pure sattva, and purified with pure desires. That's been given to us, that we can have pure desires. So Lord Buddha gets into the fray here with that. So this chart, I think we can pick it up next week, but there is enough time maybe just to look at some facts about samskaras. That's that inset box on the lower right. So we'll end with that. Some facts about samskaras, because these are the why and when, right? So now we've where, what, why, when, and who we're going to leave for later. That levels the playing field, as I said. So this will tell us how this body-mind mechanism sprouts legs and starts moving, you see. Maybe it might not be enough for people just to say, oh, the five sheaths, how do they move? I mean, there's nothing sentient in it, really, is there? So why is it taking us from heaven to earth to hell? How can it do that by itself? Well, there is a teaching of the Atman compelling everything, but it itself does not move, or the substratum of existence behind everything, like light reflecting off a leaf, or off a rock, or off a mirror. There's different levels of power. That's why studying something like energy is very important, and morality, prana, and right thinking, the energy of right thinking, will show us how the body-mind mechanism can actually free itself from moving from heaven to earth to hell. But back to this, if you want some, to look deep into this body-mind mechanism that's crawling towards its next lifetime, so it reminds you like a turtle or something, or an alligator, you see, just without being able to keep it back, it just goes on to its next rebirth. And you don't know how to call it back. So there's something in that body-mind mechanism, particularly the mind, but of course instincts in the body, but desires in the mind, that's causing that impetus to move towards the heavens, or towards the hells, or towards earth many times. So let's finish with those. First, some scars are formed due to egoic, desire-based actions in past lives. Don't forget, the past lives, they're there, as I said. This is not just a record of my mind now. It's a reflection of my mind then, and it will become the manifestation of my mind later. Some scars lie dormant, unnoticed, and are hard to detect and hard to neutralize. So if you know they're there, that's the first step. Then you can get down there and neutralize them with sadhana, with meditation, with japa, with chanting the Lord's names, with studying the scriptures, with referring to the seers, with going to your guru, with going on retreat, and so forth and so on, with sitting in class and listening to these things again till they really dawn in a certain special way. So these samskaras operate in tandem with time, karma, and life's occurrences. This is where we just read from Lord Vishishim, who was saying, if it were just a matter of one lifetime, it wouldn't be that bad. But unfortunately, in this process, there are many lifetimes that these people are headed for and have gone through already, and they're not remembering that this is the same old course again, the same little gray study of life, Vivekananda called it. So life's occurrences are going to flavor the samskaras that are already here. Look at the Buddhist nidanas. Got a nice chart on that in Footfalls of the Indian Rishis. You see how over 3 lifetimes these nidanas, like a links of chain, form. And it's not just enough, you see after a while, that they're forming, but then the next lifetime comes along, and karmas from that lifetime begin to influence the links of this new chain, which you have a chance to snap, and make them worse. They exacerbate them. And so this is where it's very difficult then to get rid of them, he says here. They can congeal into a deeper complex, if not dissolved. That's the name of this chart. Skanda means a collection. So samskara, impression in the mind. Skanda, a lot of them. And so distracted mind, restless mind, desire-based mind, excited mind, everything that's opposite of what you see in a great peaceful seer's mind are coming together and making it very difficult to get that peace of mind back and keep. So they congeal. They can, and remember we said earlier that they're usually unseen. They're dormant and unnoticed. They can only be removed by mental, spiritual purifications. I just listed a whole bunch of those for you. They often remain in residual form until samadhi occurs. That's, of course, a very good teaching, again, for the father of yoga, how to destroy the old samskaras and create new levels of samadhi. Even with objects, you can do that. Oh, it's the way I'm thinking about that object is so old and tired and boring and heavy. Why don't I think about it as an expression of God? And all of a sudden, everything changes in the periphery of the mind. And a person gets sattva from that. It begins to get balance back. Don't let them just remain as residual form. You saw what happened to Sukra. Some residual form was there in him that came back on him. Penultimately, then, they cause the soul's transmigration in continual cycles. They dictate all the details of the next life's manifestations. So we have taken apart the why and when, But we can do a little bit of more of that next week before we get on into some teachings on the who. You see, I'm not talking about a rock group or something. That who am I question is so important. And but next week then we'll do a little review, but we can just jump right into how samskara skandhas form and how they can be unformed, that is dissolved. Remember, I started off chanting dissolution of the mind stream. So if you take all the words associated with things out here, dissolve them into your mind, sit with them for a while, okay, that's ready, dissolve that into your intellect, your knowledge base, dissolve that into your ego and ripen it, dissolve that into your witness, then you're doing this dissolution of the mind stream practice, which quells all vibrations and takes all the impurities out of the things that you're withdrawing back towards the Atman. The closer you can get them toward the witness and the Atman, the easier it will be to dissolve these imperfections. And that's why we end with this chant saying, let darkness go, will o' the wisp, which leads with blinking light to pile more gloom on gloom. This thirst for life forever quench. It drags from birth to death, death to birth of soul. They conquer all who conquer self. Know this and never yield, sannyasin bold. Say Om Tat Sat Om. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mechorma Amritam Gamaya, Abir Mayeti, Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukam, Tenamam Pahi Nityam, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, and from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us, peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.